Hi, welcome to Chapter 9, Motivation and Emotion. These are the objectives we'll be covering. I'm not going to read all these, but those are the objectives we'll be covering. First of all, let's take a look at motivation. Motivation is a process by which activities are started, directed, and continued so that physical or psychological needs or wants are met. There's two types of motivation. Extrinsic motivation is external motivation. It's what a person performs, an action because it leads to an outcome that is separate from external or external to the person. For instance, most of you have a job. You probably have a job because you get a paycheck. The paycheck is extrinsic motivation. Intrinsic motivation, on the other hand, is where a person performs an action because it's fun, challenging, or satisfying in an internal matter. So let's say I'm a teacher by trade, a counselor. My intrinsic motivation for my job is I like to help young people. It's satisfying. I feel like it's a mission in my life. That would be intrinsic motivation. It's internalized motivation for doing what a person does. Next are instincts. These are biologically determined and innate patterns of behavior that exist in both people and animals. So these are behaviors that we do it because we're programmed to biologically. The instinct approach is an approach to motivation that assumes people are governed by instincts that are similar to those of animals. So in other words, we're doing things because it's how we're programmed as humans. Now, the drive reduction theory of motivation has to do with we have needs. We have basic needs for survival, such as food, water. That's essential to our survival as a human being or as an organism. And then we have drives, and that's a psychological tension and physical arousal that arises when there is a need that motivates an organism to act in order to fulfill the need and reduce the tension. For instance, a hunger drive. We feel hunger because we need food. And so there's psychological tension and physical arousal, which would be hunger pangs, that arise when we need to eat. And so that creates tension and a desire to find food. Now, the drive reduction theory assumes that behavior arises from physiological needs that cause internal drives that push us to satisfy the need and reduce tension. So for instance, a hunger drive, we have physiological drive to eat, and it causes us to, and motivates us to find food so we don't have that tension and hunger pains. That's the drive reduction theory. So we try to do things to avoid pain and gain pleasure. The primary drives involve needs of the body, such as hunger and thirst. Our secondary drives are learned through experience or conditioning, such as a need for money or social approval. They're not necessarily directly connected to survival, but they are. We're conditioned to value them. Homeostasis is the tendency of the body to maintain a steady state. Here's an example of homeostasis. In homeostasis, the body maintains balance in the body's physical states. Note this example. We have increased hunger, so we eat. As we eat, it raises the glucose level, and it thus diminishes our hunger, our drive for hunger. Then we don't eat, and then it lowers our glucose. Okay, and then the cycle continues. David McClelland in 1961 proposed a theory of motivation, highlighting the importance of three psychological needs. First of all is the need for achievement, which involves strong desire to succeed in attaining our goals, not only realistic ones, but challenging ones. The second need we all have is a need for affiliation. It's a need for friendly social interactions with relationships and relationships with others. And the third one is a need for power, the need to have control or influence over others. Think about how these three types of needs relate to the goals of many politicians. I'm not going to get political here, but usually those are pretty strong needs in anyone who runs for government. Okay, next. Stimulus motive. That's a motive that appears to be unlearned but causes an increase in stimulation, such as curiosity. So the optimal arousal theory suggests that we're motivated to avoid both boredom and stress. So we have the stimulus, and then we have arousal theory. So we want to kind of keep a balance between tension and stress and boredom. Okay. And the Yerkes-Dodson law, it's a law stating that performance is related to arousal. Moderate levels of arousal lead to better performance than do levels of arousal that are too low or too high. So you want to strike that happy medium between too high of arousal or too low of arousal. For instance, let's say you're about to take a test and you think, oh God, this test is going to be so easy. So your arousal is low, therefore you're not that motivated to study. And then you do bad on the test. Low arousal didn't work so well, did it? High arousal, say, oh, I'm so stressed out about this test. Well, the only thing I can do to lower this test is maybe study more. And so hopefully, but if you're too highly aroused, you're going to get stressed out and you're going to do bad on the test because your outside part of your brain gets shut off because of the sympathetic reaction in your brain. So we're going to talk a little bit about that more in the future. So students who have high test anxiety will seek out ways to reduce that anxiety by studying, but those with low arousal may not be motivated to study well, so you want to kind of strike a happy balance between the two. Okay, there's Zuckerman in 1979 coined the term sensation seeker. This is one who needs more arousal than the average person. You know those people that just, they do bungee jumping and they like to take risks. That part of their survival is more excitement than boredom. Zuckerman-Coleman's personality questionnaire looks at, these items. Sometimes I do crazy things just for fun. That would be an example of what we're talking about. I prefer friends that are excitingly unpredictable. I'm impulsive. So, or if I'd be low, it'd be before I begin a complicated job, I like to make careful plans. I usually think what I'm going to do before doing it. So that would be the opposite. Okay. What makes a hero? Think about a child struggling with cancer, trying to push through. That would be the incentive, the drive to survive. Incentives are things that attract or lure people into action. What about a person entering a burning car to rescue a passenger, putting their own personal safety at risk? That might be the incentive to help the stranger as if they were family. What about a person who is bullied throughout their whole life, but they grow up to launch an anti-bullying program? It might be incentive altruism, born of suffering. So incentive approaches are theories of motivation in which behavior is explained as a response to the external stimulus and its rewarding properties. Now, Abraham Maslow came up with what's called the hierarchy of needs. And if you notice, the bottom of the pyramid are our physical needs: food, shelter, clothing. We need to meet those needs. Next is the safety needs. These are basically the foundation. For instance, kids who come to school who don't have their basic needs met or their safety needs met, they're not going to think about school. Next is belongingness and love needs. It's the need to be accepted, to belong. And then next is, then they finally start dealing with self-esteem needs. So once these basic needs are met, more people are more likely to achieve, to be competent, to work to gain approval or recognition. And then cognitive needs: to know, to understand, to explore. Aesthetic needs, and self-actualization. And then finally transcendence. So for a person to be the best they can be, to work towards self-fulfillment, they really need to have those basic needs met first. And that is a key part of motivation. Get these needs met, and then people will strive to be better people. So Abraham Maslow's theory in 1943 was tested with cross-cultural studies, and they found security needs are higher than self-actualization in countries like Greece or Japan. So that changed some of the different levels on the pyramid. Also in Sweden and Norway, social needs became more important than self-actualization needs. So you would switch those different levels on the pyramid. But self-actualization is a point which people have sufficiently satisfied the lower needs, and now they're working towards their human potential, which is often seldom reached because we're so busy dealing with the lower needs. Peak experiences are times in our life in which self-actualization is temporarily achieved. There's a little chart here where you can check your understanding of Maslow. Next is Ryan and Deasy in 2000 came up with what's called the self-determination theory, or SDT. And basically, he said there's 3 inborn and universal needs that help people gain a complete sense of self in the whole. And basically those 3 universal needs are autonomy, the need to be in control of one's own behavior and goals; competence, the need to master challenging tasks; and relatedness, the need to feel a sense of belonging, intimacy, and security in relationship to others. So the theory is the social context of an action has an effect on the type of motivation existing for the action. So how do you develop what's called intrinsic motivation? In other words, where a person performs an action because the act itself is rewarding. In other words, how do I get students to do work, to do homework, not because of the grade or because of pressure to get that certificate, but because of a love of learning, intrinsic motivation. This can be best provided through a supportive environment where their needs are being met. There's an organization called the Search Institute, and they've developed a profile of what's called 20 developmental assets that promote resiliency and help foster intrinsic motivation in a student. And usually the most important one is one adult. There's one adult that's supportive, that's encouraging. There's a community of support. They're in a safe environment. Their needs are being met. That will help provide an individual who will work towards self-actualization. Next is stress. Stress involves physical, emotional, cognitive, and behavioral responses to events that are appraised as threatening or challenging. Stressors are events that cause a stress reaction. When basis drives are unmet, also in those cases, stress is often the result. Distress is the effect of unpleasant and undesirable stressors. It's the effect of unpleasant and undesirable stressors. A catastrophe is an unpredictable event that happens on a large scale. It creates tremendous stress and feelings of threat. Just examples of catastrophe would be wars, hurricanes, floods, an airline crash. Hassles, on the other hand, are smaller. They're daily annoyances, little frustrations, delays, traffic problems, irritations, minor disagreements. Now, eustress is the effect of positive events, or the optimal amount of stress needed to promote health and well-being. An example of eustress would be marriage, because hey, that's a positive thing. I'm getting married, but there's also an added stress. You have to learn to live in community, to share your bed, to share your space, to share your time. So it requires the person to adapt in a positive way, but it's new stress. Other examples of eustress would be having a new job or job promotion, having a baby, new types of stress, and you have to step up and adapt to the new situation. Positive thing, but there's stress involved. Okay, we talked about catastrophes and hassles. Let's see, pressure. Pressure is when people feel they must work harder, faster, or do more than meet expectations. So, like I say, get a promotion, there's pressure. Control. The less control a person has, the greater his or her stress level. Frustration. This would be the psychological experience produced by blocking of a desired goal or fulfillment of perceived need. External frustration could be like when your car breaks down, or when your house is broken into, which has happened to my daughter tonight. It's pretty stressful. Or when a person did not get their job. External stress. Internal stress. This would be personal frustrations, where a goal cannot be attained because internal or personal characteristics. For instance, I always wanted to become an airline pilot, but because I cannot distinguish my colors very well, I that was not a possibility. So I had personal characteristics which would not make me a very good airline pilot. So that would be internal frustration. Conflict. This is a psychological experience of being pulled towards or drawn towards two or more desires or goals, of which only one can be attained. So conflict has to is where you have to choose between different and incompatible or opposing goals. Approach conflict involves we get to choose towards two positive, desirable goals. For instance, it's time for dessert, and I get to choose between chocolate cake or tiramisu. Oh, they're both very good choices. Which one should I pick? Kind of a fun little conflict, isn't it? Next one is avoidance conflict. And that's we have to choose between two undesirable goals. For one is I have a toothache, but by golly, I do not want to see a dentist because I know he's going to drill. So I'm avoiding a dentist, but I also don't want to keep having this dang toothache. Approach avoidance conflict. A person must choose or not choose a goal that has both positive and negative aspects. So in other words, getting married. So they both have positive and negative. That it's a wonderful thing to get married, but oh, I'm going to lose some of my freedom. So that'd be approach avoidance conflict. Next is coping strategies. These are what we do to master, tolerate, reduce, or minimize effects of stressors. There's two approaches. One is the problem-focused coping. Is that where we try to eliminate the source of stress through direct problem solving. For instance, I'm failing this class. So what do? I get help. I reach out. I ask for help. I try to solve the problem. Okay. Emotion-focused coping is when one changes the impact of stressor by changing the emotional reaction. For instance, I might use the Super Bowl as an example. My team lost the Super Bowl. I could get really worked up about it and get really depressed, or say, oh, there's always next year. They learned their lesson and now they will do better. And I'm referring to my Green Bay Packers, which I was hoping to go to the Super Bowl. The next one is to ignore the problem. Usually, if you ignore problems, they don't go away. But there's some problems that it's good to ignore. For instance, when people have a heart attack, a lot of times they get all worked up and worried about the possibility of another heart attack. And here's a better situation to ignore the problem, to deal with stress, to have less worry. Ignore the worries and continue on and carry on. Next, let's look at hunger and the bodily causes of hunger. First is insulin and glucagon. These are hormones secreted by the pancreas to control levels of fats, proteins, and carbohydrates in the bloodstream. And insulin reduces the level of glucose in the bloodstream, and the glucagon increases the level of glucose in the bloodstream. Okay, so insulin reduces it, and glucagon increases it. Now, leptin is a hormone that signals the hypothalamus in your brain that the body has enough food and knock it off, no more hunger. So it reduces the appetite while increasing the feeling of being full. Our culture has certain social cues for when meals are to be eaten. We have cultural customs to eat. Now, some people do breakfast, lunch, and dinner. When I was in Wisconsin, it was breakfast, dinner, and supper. There's cultural customs of when we should eat. There's preferences of what's healthy. People in the United States do not have a healthy diet as other countries. We tend to like a lot of our junk food. There's a little experiment here on an implicit association test on food. You can watch this, click this experiment, and kind of see how we connect food with different foods, with different thoughts. Often in our country, we use food as a comfort device or escape from unpleasantness. And so then we eat, and we respond to the anticipation by eating, which produces an insulin response. Obesity is pretty much epidemic proportions in the United States. It's when the body weight of a person is 20% or more over the ideal body weight. The biological causes would be heredity, hormones, slowing metabolism with age. But however, overeating is a major factor. As food supplies stabilize in developing countries, we have a lot of food available to us. We're pretty much not without want when it comes to food. Also the things to consider is what we eat as much as how much we eat. And there's a little concept map about why people eat. This shows obese laboratory rats. So it's not only biological, but we can also train rats to, get into habits of overconsumption. Let's talk about sex. Baby, the Kinsey study, 1948. There was a massive survey of sexual behavior. He studied, over 6,000 subjects. And the findings were controversial. Shocking, as a matter of fact. 37% of males reported having at least one homosexual experience. 10% of males and 6% females reported high on the homosexual orientation scale. Kinsey didn't look at a binary view of homosexuality. He said, you're not either straight or gay. He says there's a range of being exclusively heterosexual, ranging all the way to exclusively homosexual. If you look here, there's a little range here that he used. And an interesting thing he found is that 50% of males reported having an extramarital affair. 26% females said they had an affair. People are like, oh my gosh, people are having a lot more different kinds of sex than they thought. This was back in 1948. Could you imagine the outcry? There's a movie about Kinsey out, and if you want to see the video, click this link on that PowerPoint. But some of this movie wasn't even allowed in certain movie theaters because of the controversialness, even in 2004. The Janus Report, 1993, looked at what's called the second large-scale study of sexual behaviors. The Kinsey study was interviews, and some of the critique of Kinsey's report was mostly white, middle-class, college-educated people. It was all done by interviewer effect, which means if someone's interviewing you about sex, you're either going to probably downplay things that might be embarrassing, or you might do the opposite and play it up. So people wonder about the validity of Kinsey's study. So the Janus report was more of a follow-up. They surveyed 3,000 people, but it wasn't from one area. It was from 48 different states and a real cross-section of different people and a diverse group of people. They found out 19% of men and 8% of women had sex by the age of 14. 67% men, 46% of women reported having premarital sex, which was also defined as living together. 95% of men and 5% of women identified themselves as homosexual. Oh, I did that wrong. That was not 95. It was supposed to be 9% men and 5% women were identified as homosexual. So it was a little bit less than 10% from the Kinsey study. 80% of men and 70% of women had masturbated. So it's a pretty common thing. Next is sexual orientation. This is a person's sexual attraction and affection for members of the opposite or the same sex. And heterosexuality has to do with attraction to the opposite sex. Homosexuality is a term for attraction to the same sex. Bisexuality is an attraction to both sexes. There's a little video here on the categories of sexual orientation. You probably have heard the term LGBT, which means lesbian, gay, bisexual, and transgender. Those are appropriate terms referring to somebody besides a heterosexual category. I like this chart. This is based on Kinzer's premise of continuum of sexual orientation. Here's some. Oh my gosh, I think I clicked something. Pause. Turn the volume down on this thing. Okay. All right. Sorry about that. I'm having a little technical difficulties. Continuum of sex. Remember, Kinzer said not everything's binary. This is an example how Kinsey moved us beyond the binary view of sexuality. Basically, everything has a continuum. Even biologically, there's a continuum of male and female, because several children are born what's called intersex, which means they have both male and female hyperplasia, the extra X, extra Y chromosome. So there's a continuum of male and female, and then there's what's in between. Then gender identity is how you identify as a man or a woman. Now, if I'm male physically, biologically, but identify as a woman, that would be my gender identity. That would be called transgender. In the Native American tribes, they often referred to it as a two-spirited person, that they're physically male and identified as a female. And they actually had a tradition called Burdash, where they were allowed to change their gender, and they would be accepted in society, living out their identity as their chosen identity that they identified with. Or a female who identifies as male would be considered transgender or two-spirit. Next is gender expression, and this would have to do with seeing yourself as masculine or feminine. So I may be a male who's very masculine. There's also some males who are quite effeminate in the way they express themselves. There's some females who are very feminine in how they dress and how they appear, and then there's some females who express themselves as more masculine. Then sexual orientation is who you're attracted to. So males attracted to women would be called heterosexual, or if they're attracted to other men, would be homosexual. Female attracted to women is homosexual. Attracted to other men is heterosexual. And then bisexual would be attracted to both. And then there's asexual, where they're attracted to neither. Okay. But what I'd like you to see is that not everything has to be seen as binary. That there's, like what Kinzer said, there's a range of understanding these things, and they can be quite complex. Whenever someone tries to explain something complicated in easy terms, there's usually run into problems. Next, development of sexual orientation. Physically, there's no specific gene that determines orientation. So you can't look at someone's DNA and say, oh, this person is homosexual. There are some switches called epimarks, which control when, where, and how much of the gene is expressed as a male or as a female. Homosexuality has been a very controversial issue. Up until 1973, homosexuality was listed on the DSM-2, the Diagnostic Statistic Manual, for classification of mental disorders. But now, since 1973, it's been replaced by a category called sexual orientation disturbance. I think it's important to know that we have come a long ways with accepting people with the homosexual orientation since then. However, family acceptance is a key protective factor as to whether an LGBT youth considers suicide. Remember, suicide is the third highest cause of death for young people. The threat of suicide is even 4 times higher if the youth is an LGBT youth compared to their heterosexual peers. So it's real important that their own family accept them for who they are, or that threat of suicide is much higher. Next is birth order. Blanchard in 2001 found out that the more older brothers a man has, the more likely the younger man will become homosexual. So a young man who's got several older brothers, more likely to be homosexual. Neurological similarities. Selvig and Lindstrom in 2008 found that homosexual men and heterosexual women had neurologically similar classifications on when they studied their brain types, where homosexual women and heterosexual men had neurologically similar images. Now, twin studies, Bailey and Pillard, 1991, found out that 52% of identical twin siblings were also gay, whereas only 22% of fraternal twin siblings were gay. So the next one is a question of, is there a genetic marker? Hammer in 1993 identified some genes that carried on the X chromosome passed on from the mother. Found out that 33 out of 44 homosexual brothers carried on this X chromosome. Next is feminine boys theory. Bailey and Zucker in 1995 noted that male homosexuals were consistently noted as feminine as children, and later on were identified as homosexual. Okay, next is emotions. The feeling of aspect of consciousness characterized by certain physical arousal, certain behavior that reveals emotion to the outside world, and an inner awareness of feelings. So in other words, how does one identify emotion, express emotion, and manage one's emotions? So which part of the brain are involved in various aspects of emotion? First, the amygdala is a complex structure with many different nuclei and subdivisions whose roles have been investigated primarily through studies of fear conditioning. See, the emotional stimuli travel to the amygdala by both a fast, crude, low road, which is through the subcortical part structure of the brain, and a slower and more involved cortical, high road. There's a little interactive image here to help you understand. So here is a person who sees a shark. Okay, first of all, the low road is activated because it's much faster. It allows us to quickly notice danger, be consciously aware, sometimes before we're even aware of the danger of the stimulus. For instance, I might see something moving in the water, and all of a sudden I'm going, and I have a quick automatic arousal like something's not right. I don't even know what it is yet, but I feel unsafe. And then all of a sudden I notice it's a shark. That's the high road. It's a slower function, but it allows us to recognize a threat and take more conscious control of our emotional response. And so the low road is where we go, and then high road is, holy crap, it's a shark. And then we respond accordingly. Does that help you understand high road and low road? Next, which parts of the brain are involved in various aspects of emotion? There's the subcortical and cortical areas on different hemispheres, different lobes. There's what's called anterior cingulate cortex and the lateral orbitofrontal cortex. A lot of big words, but all of that helps us identify, express, and manage emotions. Next, facial expressions. Ekman and Friesen in 1969 came up with what's called 7 universal emotions that are expressed commonly through facial expressions of emotion. Even blind children display these similar reactions, which supports the idea that emotional expressions have their basis in biology rather than from learning. So how we express our emotions, let's give it a label. Take a look at these faces here. I want you to see if you can pick out some of these universal expressions of emotion. Sadness, hope you put F. Surprise, that's E. Fear, it's kind of similar, but it's B. Disgust, C. Happiness, D. Anger, A. I hope you were able to successfully label all those facial expressions. Next is a common sense theory of emotion. In other words, I'm going to go through a bunch of different theories, but and these theories basically try to describe what comes first, what comes second. So common sense theory is the stimulus leads to emotion, which leads to a bodily arousal. So first is emotion, and then 2, the body responds to the stimuli. For instance, a dog starts snarling at me. Okay, first emotion, fear, and then my body responds with the sympathetic reaction. Okay. Next, the James Lang theory of motion. He said no. He says first comes the body arousal. The fight or flight sympathetic nervous system kicks in with your increased heartbeat, rate and rapid breathing. Second is you label the emotion. Oh my God, I must be scared because my heart is beating and I'm trembling. Okay, so the James Lange theory, created by William James, 1884. He's also one who came up with the functionalism theory. And Carl Lange, who shortly afterwards had a real similar theory. They just kind of combined their theory. But it is based on, I see a snarling dog, and so first I have physical arousal, changes in my body. Oh my God, I'm in danger. And then the second response is emotion. Now the Cannon-Bard theory of motion says no. They both happen at the same time. So here we go, snarling dog, my brain is active and it's doing both a fear reaction from my cognitive processing and then also physical reaction, both at the same time. So I'm shaking and feeling afraid at the same time. Now the cognitive arousal theory said no. It's the two-factor theory. Both the physical arousal and labeling of the arousal are based on cues from the environment that must occur before emotional is even experienced. So this theory by Schachter and Singer in 1962 says physical arousal and cognitive appraisal both have to occur before the emotion occurs. Okay, so here's an image, snarling dog, and simultaneously my brain says, oh my God, this is bad, and my body is physically reacting. Then comes fear. Okay, next is the facial feedback hypothesis. In other words, my facial feedback causes my brain and my body to respond to that emotion. Now, you've probably heard before the saying, put on a happy face, and then a happy face will make you happier. By the way, please don't do that. Don't tell a female to put on a happy face or smile, because it's a sexist expectation that women are not supposed to be, they're supposed to be accommodating, and they're not supposed to express negative emotion. But when you think of this theory, what about people who their face is paralyzed? They're not able to express their emotions on their paralyzed face, but they still have emotional reactions. So, you know, I heard of, fake it till you make it. If you smile, put a smile on the outside, it'll help you put a smile on the inside. So, I think that's sometimes good. It helps you with changing your attitude, but you don't want to enforce that on other people. Okay, next one, cognitive mediational theory. The word mediation means go between. So the stimulus must be interpreted or praised by a person in order to result in the physical response and the emotional reaction. So in other words, there has to be some sort of, you see the barking dog or the growling dog, and the first thing you do is you stop and you think and appraise the situation. Is this dog going to attack me or not? If not, you're going to appraise it and say, he's just barking, I'm not in danger. And so you appraise it as not a serious thing. Sympathetic system doesn't kick in, you just walk away. However, if you fear danger, then boom. Once there's an appraisal of threat, that interpretation then causes the emotional reaction and the physical response simultaneously. Here's a little model that compares all these different charts. But here it is, snarling dog. Once I appraise a threat, then I have fear and a body response. So these are all the theories combined. If you want to go over those, they're in your PowerPoint presentation. Now, a question you might want to ask is, which one's correct? Let me go back one here. Oops, go back to. Which one's correct? I think human emotions are so incredibly complex. All may be correct to some degree depending on the situation. Okay, last one is applying psychology to everyday life. This is called the Get It Done method. And this is from Allen in 2001. I've heard of Get It Done before. Who was that? It was a guy from Nebraska that said that. Anything, how do you get it done? Think about a big project that you're facing with. Oh yes, annotated bibliography or the reflection paper. And let's say you're just, you're at a standstill and moving forward with us. First step, Capture anything that has your attention. Get it out of your head and physically collect in one place. So before you start, make a list of all the other things that are occupying your mind. Put it down on paper and then set it aside so you don't have to worry about all those other things. Okay. Number 2, process and define what you can take action on. Identify the next steps. So in other words, list the steps. What do I got to do for this paper? Well, I got to first go online and come up with 10 sources. Next, I got to put the information down in APA style. Then I need to write the annotations. Then you organize the information in categories and contexts. And then you complete weekly reviews, assess what needs to get done this week. Then finally do your next actions within the time frame allowed. And as a result, you will get her done. Thank you for your attention. Have a great week. That concludes this presentation.